It was very interesting to see. It's one thing to hear and to watch a movie, and it's another thing to actually see what a difference it's made to a person. So that was truly enlightening. We will now move on to the next session, which is a plenary discussion on systems change for entrepreneurship-led job creation. I will be handing over to Mr. Shrashtant Patara, Senior Vice President of the Development Alternatives Group. I called him on stage once before, but I forgot to give an introduction to him. Well, most of you already know him, but I'd still like to say some really nice things about him. So Mr. Patara is an architect by training and has been with the Development Alternatives Group since 1988, providing strategic direction to teams working in the areas of habitat, renewable energy, water and sanitation, waste recycling and livelihood support systems. His work is at the forefront of designing multi-stakeholder-based approaches to the resolution of complex development challenges. Currently, Mr. Patara is responsible for the management of programs aimed at creating community benefits through the promotion of entrepreneurship and sustainable technology solutions, including the use of decentralized renewable energy systems. The foremost amongst these being the Lacacia Foundation-supported Work for Progress project. Now I'd like to hand over to Mr. Patara. Louder.
Thank you. I think anything we've done probably pales in comparison to the work being done by the Work for Progress entrepreneurs now. It's time now to move forward in the program and dive a little bit deeper for not too long to the whole idea of disrupting systems, creating change. And to do that, we have 5 eminent panelists with us this evening. I'd like to invite you to the stage. Ms. Aloka Majumdar, who's the head of corporate sustainability at the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation Limited in India. Thank you, Aloka, for being with us today. Mr. Gorka Espiau, who's the senior fellow at the Agirre Lehendakaria Center for Social and Political Studies. Gorka, could we have you with us on stage, please? Thank you. Mr. Phumlani and Nikontawana, who's with us all the way from South Africa. He's founding director of Fauta, Africa. Phumlani, could we have you on stage, please? Ms. Nadia Rasheed, who's the Deputy Resident Representative of the United Nations Development Program in India. Nadia, could you please come on stage? And Mr. Rohtash, who's the Chairman and Managing Director of EM3 Agriservices Private Limited. A round of applause, please, louder for our panelists. If it's okay with our panelists, I'll save some time and not go through the formal introductions that we have here. I'd encourage all of you in the audience to take a look at the speaker profiles because our panelists have done some amazing work during their careers. In this session, titled Systems Change for Entrepreneurship-Led Job Creation, our panelists are going to share their thoughts on how we can not just solve the problem, but address the underlying reasons that cause the problem in the first place. Looking at how we can change daily routines, resource streams, power relations, and values, among the many other things that need to be changed if we're trying to create a shift within existing systems. And a couple of the concepts that we're going to look at is how we can transform change, or you could say change the way we change the world across scales. It was quite significant during the day's deliberations that a number of speakers homed in on the significance of the mesoscale, the intermediate level, where a big connect can be made between the resources that we have at our disposal, whether it's with governments or big industry, and the needs at the micro level, the intermediary functions, the actors that need to operate at the mesoscale. And of course, how you can bring about a change in process to do so. We'll be looking at change across sectors to make sure that we don't follow a linear approach, an approach of directed action in the area of entrepreneurship, but look at interdependencies, collaboration, co-creation, and how many different actors can come together to change the system, and how across stakeholders we can shift from a linear approach, as I was speaking, to a social innovation-based approach that we've seen examples, powerful examples of in the discussion so far. And with that very, very brief introduction, I'd like to now move to our panel. And if it's okay, I'll just take a seat. Thank you. I hope this is working out. Thank you. Aloka, I'd like to begin with you, and we're going to dispense with formalities in this discussion, not too much about the problems, but I'd like you to share what you see as the big changes taking place in the system, and then if you could spend a few minutes in the entrepreneurship ecosystem, sorry, and then if you could spend a few minutes talking about what trends might be emerging, game-changing trends might be emerging in the area of finance, particularly access to credit for micro-entrepreneurs. Aloka, please.
Sure. Thank you, Shrashtant, and pleasure to be here. I know it's pretty late in the evening, so we're going to be very precise with what Shrashtant actually asks us. From HSBC's perspective, we have been working in the space of livelihoods for a very long time. And over the past 10 years, we've actually seen the livelihood space evolving in various ways. One of the biggest learnings for us in the livelihood space is that there are buckets. So there is something called self-employment or entrepreneurship, and there is something called jobs, which is formal employment. So we currently, what we have seen is that there is a focus on skilling. When it's skilling for jobs, the big shift is just training to placement link skilling. So, and that's something particularly that we have been focusing on as well. So formal employment and also connect with corporates. I think what we have seen is that India has a very robust system of skill development. But the big change that's happened over the past, you can say 4 to 5 years, is that not-for-profits in collaboration with corporates have started working with corporates to understand their need. So that's the part that's moving as far as skills development is concerned. When it comes to entrepreneurship, I think the big challenge still remains working capital. As far as entrepreneurship is concerned, the other thing that we've seen is that you have various levels of marginalized communities. Even within the marginalized community, you have various levels of income. So you have to have different approaches in terms of when you're creating an entrepreneur, various levels of intervention. For the entrepreneurship, I think as far as India is concerned, we've seen a great development when it comes to working with entrepreneurs. For us, one strategy which has worked really well is that we have worked with NGO arms of microfinance organizations. Because they create clients for themselves, naturally the livelihoods intervention has been very, very strong, both from livelihood skilling as well as financial capability building. So that's been a big learning for us. I'll try to be brief. That the big shift again that we're seeing now is that we currently have programs which is reaching out to entrepreneurs at various levels. So somebody is creating entrepreneurs. One is scaling up entrepreneurs, because I think another big problem for us is sustainability of micro entrepreneurs. That remains a big challenge still, and that's something that I think we all need to work in collaboration. As far as credit to the sector is concerned, we still have a lot of challenge. You do have the not-for-profits doing a level of funding, then you have microfinance institutions, and then you have mainstream banks. But I think within that also there are issues, because you have financing to self-help groups. We have seen there's a huge change now with individual loans being sought by entrepreneurs, and that's something where we see a lot of challenges at this point of time. And that's being addressed now by various organizations. So you actually have organizations being created to give a certain size of loans. So that's another trend that we have seen. I think one of the big things in which we are working very closely with you too, and some of our partners, is I think linking to supply chain. is something which is going to be very, very important because I think the big challenge for India has been, while we have a lot of micro entrepreneurs, but sustainability of micro entrepreneurs still remain a huge challenge. And I think linking it to the value chain perhaps is one of the innovations we are seeing from the sector. We are not undermining. So in this entire process of somebody producing stuff and then giving it to the corporate, you have a lot of intermediaries in between. I'm not undermining the importance of an intermediary, but the fact is that there has to be a way where the producer at the grassroots level actually benefits from the product that he or she is making. So that's, I think, the big change that we want to see. And the other big change is that corporates are becoming very conscious about sustainable procurement. And that's going to be, I think, the game changer for us to work in the grassroots and do the connect between the value chain. So I'll stop here.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and helping us home in on what the precise challenges would be. I think it's very interesting that you talked about the shift towards loans being sought by individual entrepreneurs. The development sector has, as all of us would know, been focused a lot on groups, whether it's self-help groups, farmer cooperatives, etc., or extremely small loans. And it's a challenge that we faced in the Work for Progress program as well, and now in the HSBC supported Entrepreneurship for Empowerment program, that we didn't find readily available products for the private micro entrepreneur who wanted a loan of, say, somewhere between 500 euros to 3,000 to 4,000 euros. And hopefully we might be able to come back to that. Gorka, I'm going to put you on the spot. You've talked about social innovation to us now for at least 3 years. A lot of people I know have been following your work. In 3 minutes, what is social innovation and how does it create shifts in systems, particularly in the area of entrepreneurship-led job creation? And if we could help Gorka out with some visuals which I think are available, or at least they should come up in some way. Yeah, there they are.
Okay, well, very rapidly, I think when we talk about social innovation, it's just how to respond innovatively to social needs. That is as simple as that. And we are talking about new products, new services, and new processes. That's kind of the basic way of describing it. In practice is, and if you talk about system change, it's really how are we going to respond in a different way to the systemic challenges that we are facing, because the tools that we have been using so far are not capable of responding to these challenges. So we're talking about employment, or the implication of the future of work, climate change, sustainability. So these are challenges that cannot be addressed from a traditional way. And we keep talking about system change, but in reality, it's very, very difficult to see interventions that are incorporating a systems lens. This is a graphic of the way that normally, the way in our heads, we normally understand innovation and social innovation. And it's how we identify the problem, we explore the problem, how do we explore different possibilities, how do we test, etc., etc. But if you see at this graphic, it's a linear process. It's still a linear process. And this is the way that 99% of social innovation and innovation strategies are operating in the world. This other image is, in my opinion, explains a little bit better what social innovation is. So how to change that mindset from a linear, perfect analysis of how the world should operate to the reality, a complex reality of the world. For me, this is an image I took last week in Bangkok, working with the UNDP colleagues. And I just took it because I thought it was a beautiful image. But then I was looking at the image and I said, well, actually, this is what we do. This is what we try to do. Because you see a a lot of interconnected, in this case, cables that are providing energy or supposed to be providing a solution in a very chaotic way, but actually in a way that generates also, it works and generates beauty. So when I think about what the Work for Progress is trying to do, I think it helps us to better understand what social innovation processes than that's a perfect image. Because for me, all those initiatives that were explained today are initiatives that are individual initiatives, but that they are aligned, that they are going in the same direction, in the same of this, the way these cables are going. They are aligned in a more profound way. That is the narratives that Kanika was talking about. They are doing their own thing, but they are connected in the aspiration of transforming the socio-economic conditions of their livelihoods. So the problem is, okay, if social innovation is more like this, like the other one, how actually we learn to operate in this way. And just the way that Work for Progress is doing it, and many other, UNDP is also, I think, transitioning in that direction very rapidly, and many other organizations in the world, is about how do we learn. It looks very similar to what many things we are doing, but profoundly is totally different. So when we say we need to understand social dynamics and what is going on in these communities, the question is, how are we doing that? Those examples we saw before about using design thinking techniques applied to communities that have never been exposed to those are extraordinary examples of listening to the real needs in a more profound way. How are we listening? How are we interpreting that information, not from a group of experts, but actually in collective analysis? Yesterday we were also, day before, sorry, in an exercise on the field where the local entrepreneurs were co-designing the way that the incubator services was going to help them in order to scale their initiatives. This process, simple as this, is a process that actually is not happening in Europe, is not happening in many, many countries when they have to decide how do we actually design the services that we are going to be using. So it was a beautiful opportunity for me to experience. But the next challenge, and I think it's the challenge we are all facing, I'm sorry I don't have the answer, and it's the next, I think the next challenge of Work for Progress is how the different levels of innovation are interconnected. Because we are talking about micro enterprise, and this is a fundamental part of it, and this is where most of the investment should be invested. But also we know that systemic change will not happen only operating at a micro level. So the same way we are thinking about generating ecosystems for micro employment, we need to be operating at the scale of medium-sized companies. Also the same thing for large-scale public-private partnerships. Same thing for new public services, and the same thing for new regulation. So these are 5 different levels that need to be interconnected if we need to generate systemic change. This is something that most of us know, the theory will tell us, but actually nobody is doing. So the real question for all of us is, how can we experiment and how can we try to bring together private sector, government, international institutions, NGOs, governments, to learn how to work on these 5 levels at the same time, in a way that it will probably look, as I said, more similar to that chaotic image of the cables, but it's actually generating, I think, a more systemic impact than the current processes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We'll find the answer, is all I can say, and thank you for setting us that challenge. We're very fortunate in the Work for Progress program to have space where now we can start interaction across scales. And we started looking at the meso and the macro level and how it would connect. Phumlani, I've had the good fortune to listen to you lecture in South Africa and have been inspired, if I may steal a moment, by the quality of discourse that takes place in South Africa on issues of social development. And I've shared this with many colleagues here and there in South Africa, how answers to many of the challenges we face across the globe will probably be found in countries such as South Africa and India, because the tensions that exist there don't exist anywhere else. And equally important, the resources, the innovativeness, and the zeal to find those solutions probably exist in our countries. Phumlani, you've looked a lot at entrepreneurship education, or changing the way in which entrepreneurship evolves. Could you share a few thoughts with us on that subject? And if once again I could ask for the 3 or 4 slides that Phumlani has. Gorka has the clicker.
Okay, I had prepared some slides, but I want to keep it conversational. So maybe I'll refer to some, maybe not. But the first thing I want to say is we are talking about micro enterprises here. But the reality is over 95% of micro enterprises die every 2 to 3 years. This is a global trend. And they die because the entrepreneurship education and training community, pretty much most of us in the space, do not do justice in making their revenue models and their business models robust enough to sustain competition, to sustain technology innovations that are highly disrupting enterprises. When I was on the field, you could see how if a foreign company came and aggregated efforts through technology, that could disrupt some of the businesses. The other piece to say is that developing countries across the world, micro-enterprises are a character of their economies. So in Africa, for example, 80 to 90% of the countries rely on micro-enterprises, so employing between 5 to 20 people. And these micro-enterprises are going on for a very long time, but very susceptible to disruptions and risk and not scaling. So in thinking about how do we do this work, how do we do this work in a way that moves away from a small business development narrative to a high growth narrative? In other words, how do we take these micro enterprises and make them small growing businesses? So what we call SGBs. And you can't talk about that work without thinking about what do you mean by entrepreneurship. So if for an entrepreneurship organization or development organization, entrepreneurship means small business development, it determines the type of tools, processes, and partnerships that they bring on board that work with the startups. If you are about finding small growing businesses that you want to scale, it determines a different set of tools as well. So it's very much about the approach that you're using in transitioning micro enterprises to high businesses. And there's a conventional approach, which if you think of a hub, if you think of an organization that works with entrepreneurs as a hub, and you think of the cycle there as a, I don't know if this can point or not.
The pointer won't work,
okay,
unfortunately.
That's fine.
Yeah.
If you think of the ring there as the context under which the entrepreneur is operating, what this suggests is that identifying small businesses, training them in the hub, and then maybe throwing them to a partner or two will produce innovation and then entrepreneurship. So that is kind of the classical approach that a lot of organizations use. But actually, what I think Development Alternatives is doing really well is thinking about how do we partner with local context, how do we partner with public policy stakeholders in a way that produces innovations that have both policy linkages and market linkages. And that's how development happens. But I think just to make this simpler, small business development or micro enterprise development is about attribution, whereas high growth businesses are about contribution. And entrepreneurship education that produces sustainable businesses is about contribution. It's about understanding that to work with a micro business alone and not help it to develop a revenue model that can grow and sustain challenges is not enough. And that actually what you need is high impact ventures and the ecology of support and balancing that with policy. But high impact ventures actually require a particular talent that will focus on high growth, that will have high growth expectations, international orientation, and innovation driven. And you need the secondary factors to make that happen. The question is, how do we do entrepreneurship education and training in a way that reduces those red barriers, such as lack of capital, such as poor enterprise support, such as linear enterprise support, and also just being comfortable with entrepreneurs doing the business as usual type of businesses. So in thinking about entrepreneurship education, we need to realize that it's about mindset, yes, and culture shifts, but it's also about embedding competencies within startups that can help them grow and win. But it's also a process. And so if we have this conversation in detail some other time, we will then talk about the differences between didactical approaches and what is called ecological approaches in entrepreneurship. And the first example I mentioned is a linear didactical approach that assumes if I train entrepreneurs, they'll win. Whereas you need to do a lot more work to try and address and make sure that they have all those three attributes and the right talent. So it's really the challenge that Development Alternatives have is really thinking about how do we take the small businesses and make them high impact ventures, because jobs are not going to come from micro enterprises. What you're going to get there is one or two people that you're employing, but it's not sustainable and it's not going to give you the magic. The only magic you'll get is culture shifts and mindset. But if you're looking for jobs, you need to be talking about high impact ventures, and we can have that conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those thoughts. I think the comparison you made between attribution and contribution might trigger a few thoughts. We've all seen the perils of doing work in this area where you attribute the success of entrepreneurs to yourselves. And that success can be very, very short-lived. Nadia, may I invite you now? You're in the position within UNDP of being able to effect change, particularly in the way that the UNDP works with governments, and yet does not lose focus at what is happening at the grassroots level, which is where some of us who have followed UNDP's work can see a lot of the innovation springs from. Most recently, with your investment in innovation, open innovation platforms, etc., could you share a few thoughts in terms of how we could actually all together make change happen in a much more substantial way or systemically. Nadia.
Sure. So for UNDP, our key focus is really on supporting governments to advance the SDG agenda, and doing that working with civil society, with the private sector, with other development partners. And UNDP's particular focus in that aspect is really looking at SDG localization and how we advance the commitment to leave no one behind. And if I connect the question you're asking me in terms of India, you know, we've already talked about one of the biggest challenges but also opportunities for India is the fact that there is this very large youth cohort. It's the largest number of young people in the world. And for India, the challenge is how do we ensure that the jobs, the entrepreneurship opportunities are there so that this becomes a potential for growth rather than a challenge when it comes to achieving India's development aspirations. So two key challenges in really being able to do that and being able to expand opportunities for jobs and entrepreneurships are firstly bringing these entrepreneurship opportunities where people are. So having people be able to really pursue opportunities without having to move to a new city, to move to a big metropolis, to move to a big locality, but actually to be able to use the capacities and the connections and the networks that they have where they are to access entrepreneurship opportunities. A second big challenge, and the ambassador spoke about this earlier, you know, in India there is this really alarming situation in which women's labor force participation is incredibly low. But another alarming statistic is that for registered business owners, only about 14% or so are women. So obviously this is a critical group that needs to be reached. So for us, if I now look at what we're doing at the local level in trying to address this challenge, looking at how you bring entrepreneurship opportunities to the local level and also how you bring more women that opportunity, we've been testing out a few ideas, and for us, you know, we test at the local level to bring that learning to the policy level and see how we can try and with our partners look at systematic change. But what we found as really some of the opportunities or some of the solutions that emerge at the local level. Firstly, one is for many women who want to start an initiative at home, you know, a micro enterprise, sometimes the biggest challenge is that they don't have that supportive environment against them. They might have, for example, a husband who's not very supportive, neighbors who don't really approve of what they're doing. And so people want to try things out, and often for women, you know, they hit a hurdle and they don't have that support, and this stalls. So one of the things we've been testing out is working with groups of community mentors, so identifying what are called BISSAKis, so community members who live within that community and really act as a support, both in terms of bringing psychosocial support and helping create that network so that a woman is in a stronger position to resist some of the disapproval that comes, but also business support and really providing that kind of support to ensure that it's a continued process of learning. So this is one of the ways that we've been trying to test out ideas and help expand opportunities. Second is we see that for a lot of young people in rural areas who come from families that are, for example, small farm holding families or artisanal families, the young people may have been educated and really have aspirations for career growth and for doing, you know, new and exciting things, but the opportunities that they have in their families are very limited, perhaps. You know, you might become a farmer or you might become a small-scale artisan, but you have aspirations for something bigger. So we're also working with many partners on a mini MBA course, which is a course that really allows young women who have this interest to start to take up jobs that are more up the value chain. So looking at managing enterprises, looking at ways that they can support their own families to take on business development. So these are just a couple of examples that are really showing a lot of promise already, and these kinds of solutions are emerging from many different localities. The critical thing, I think, as you were saying, is how do we connect this up? So we look at systemic change, we look at the ecosystem overall, and for us it's partnership, right? And it's these collaborative platforms, and that's the only way you affect that change, is by having different actors come together, you know, representing those of us who are sitting here on stage and people in the audience, to really be able to make these connections and to ensure that that learning is influencing policy at a higher level. In India, state level is like a country, but, you know, at a state level and at the national level.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those thoughts. And I'm sure we'd pick up, if not on the stage, but, you know, in conversation thereafter on many of the examples that you shared and how they could be taken forward. Rohtash, you've been a pioneer who's been positioned at what we call the meso level, because you've brought, you know, large pools of capital, technology, systems, etc., to the farmers, to the rural economy, not just the farmers in your venture. Is this something that you see is happening increasingly, not just with pioneers like your own, but through a spectrum of aggregators, people who are seeing opportunity and are not you know, pursuing just economic goals as a normal business would, but seek to actually transform the lives of people, do good to the environment, create impact, as it were?
Yeah, that's a complex one. But to begin with, my grateful thanks for being the last, I got in the last word, so to speak. And it's rare, especially at home, that I get in the last word. So I'm indeed very grateful. On another light note, obviously the last time I was here a year or two ago at the same platform, I didn't do too badly. You got me back here. But your offer of some Spanish wine at the end of it did help a little bit. A little bit. On a more serious note, and thanks for those comments. I'm not sure we are all that deserving. Having said that, I'm going to start making an observation between my last visit to this event and today. I see a strong shift away from the term jobs, and we are thinking entrepreneurship, right? And I think that's a very welcome change. Finally, I think the environment is getting around to saying, please don't look at Raisina Hill for giving you jobs, because that model hasn't worked. It's broken. What has worked is the animal spirit of the entrepreneur, and particularly the micro-entrepreneur. And for a moment, I'm going to request this audience to start thinking of the farmer as a micro-entrepreneur. He has capital, he has the production unit called the land, he or she require inputs of various kinds, the process is given, there's a fair amount of uncertainty like any industry, and you have to monetize the output, right? This particular mind shift from looking at farming as farming to looking at farming as an industry, as a factory of food, is probably the first mind shift that has to take place if you're going to create, let me not use the word jobs again, if you're going to create a lot of work that needs to be done by masses of people and be productively well paid for it, right? There's talk about the space in the economy for agriculture is declining, etc., etc. So what are people going to do? Just look at the upside, the productivity, where we are at what, 25% of global standards on an average. Look at the productivity upside. It's not going to happen on its own. Somebody has to deploy technology in various shapes and sizes, and masses of people. You don't have to have somebody digging the soil. You have to have people employed in this factory of food at a mass scale level. And my sense of this environment says that you will actually create more work to do rather than the number of people. You don't have to worry about that. And a couple of, I do bring to, I'd like to, I was jotting down a few examples to bring to this. We are admittedly called the Uber of agriculture. We have something like 600 movers like tractors, harvesters, and another 1,200 pieces of equipment, more like 1,300 pieces of equipment spread out all over Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh. We are employing, this word must go away, roughly about 4,000 people are involved at the moment in giving services. They are not on my payroll. They are not on so-and-so's payroll. Think about a restaurant which only produces parathas and dal, and everybody else around that restaurant, dhabas, are producing raita and jalebi and dish A, B, C, D, but the customer is one. So there are so many, and it happens, if you go to Amritsar, you will see that. Kesar Ka Dhaba is essentially a place that produces parathas and chane ki dal. Right around it are about 25, 30 guys who come and pitch in, and midnight they sit down and work out the accounting for the day, and they share. Quality control is kept. So many people, they have back-end cooks and so on and so forth. So this is what is known as a distributed enterprise. Indian agriculture, and the lens through which I speak is only agriculture. I don't claim to know much else, particularly in the last few years of my life. So we are going to be looking at a situation of agriculture where layers of mechanization and technology are going to start getting delivered to the farmer. Let me share with you. A farmer calls me and says, can I have my land plowed? Yes, sir. What time? Tomorrow, 8 a.m. My machine will be there. I know the record of saying where he is, there's geo-tapping and so on. And I know how much time it will take, that it will be here at so-and-so time, just like an Uber does. We use IT behind to figure out the routing and so on. At the end of the cycle, he says, can I have it harvested? In the middle, he says, can I have it sprayed? And lately, what we are saying is, you want to sell it as well? Okay, we'll figure out a way of doing it for you as well. Essentially, acting with him across the chain. We are not backed by social capital or philanthropy capital. There's venture capital behind it. And believe me, there is a surfeit of capital around the world. Your interest rates are so low. There's such a surfeit of capital waiting for models to happen. So, as an example, what are the various layers that can happen in something like this? Particularly when I talk about technology being delivered on a pay-for-use basis. An Uber call, we land up, right? You want spraying, we land up. Somewhere along the way, he needs his soil examined. We can send a guy with a camera from a phone like yours is mine, take photographs of his leaves, which are digested by servers, to tell him what is the deficiency in NPK for a given crop, right? So you can put the right amount of fertilizer. Somebody has to get that done. Somebody's got to do the billing. Somebody's got to do the collection. Somebody's got to make sure that knowledge is spread for new services to happen. Business management at the grassroots level, you called a mini MBA. Those are the prime needs that need to kind of come in together. And to your point, Aloka, yeah, the financial, the reimagining of agriculture must be accompanied by reimagining the deployment of resources as well. And I regret very, very deeply that sectors such as, with the utmost apology, sectors such as banking have thought it fit to protect their domain so far, extract high interest rates, but not go out and break into the wallet of the farmer. Think about it. The KCC system is broken. There is no money from the lakhs of crores that have gone into KCC, right? 50,000 or 5 lakh rupees an acre and so on and so forth. There's genuinely no money in it because it's all been withdrawn for consumption. Shadis, houses, scooters, everything else. Other industries have benefited from this surfeit of capital. But to apply it in agriculture, it's dead and it's empty. Now, what do you need now? There's no point talking about the past. Can we invent, and we should, a situation where the KCC, which is a UIDAI equivalent of who the farmer is, with the banking system, with the service provider, in a three-way approach. So the delivery of service is automatically assuring the deliverer of service from the farmer side and the banking system that he will get paid. Today, for example, I can't take the risk of giving infinite credit, but I could if something like this were to happen. Has the banking and the technology sector and the mobile tech sector come together to solve these? And those are the areas. Now for jobs, driving this equipment, layers of technology, business management on the ground, financial management, billing, collection, I can't see job losses here. I can see job creation here, or work creation here, profitable work creation. So those, in a sense, are my openers. What we have not done is reimagine the way things are done. I regret that things are not going to change, as Einstein said, or somebody like Einstein. It had to be an Einstein to say something that insightful. If you keep doing what you're doing, you'll get the results that you were getting. Right? You've got to, who did? It is Einstein. Great, great man. So long and the short, I think it's about revolutionizing the way we reimagine agriculture rather than incrementally. Otherwise, we'll just keep talking about numbers of jobs. It hasn't worked, it won't work. And one final point. I think it's a fault to a very large extent of business developers of not being able to reimagine this, because when you go to capital, there are grades of capital. There's philanthropy capital, Daya Dan. Then there is social impact capital, which is the surplus of the greed that the system has had over 2 years, which says, I must put it to good use. We are no strangers to that in India. Then there is a capital that wants to take a risk on the future. Then there's capital that wants to protect itself and say, I want a return on this. And so on and so forth till you reach those hedges and so on and so forth. Have we sufficiently appealed to the layers of capital up to and beyond venture capital to say, here is a new model, put your money behind it? And frankly, you will reach a situation, whatever you do, political compulsions will not allow you to do what you've been doing forever.
Thank you. Thank you so much for reminding us that in Work for Progress, at some point, we won't be able to stay within that narrow system of off-farm entrepreneurship and job creation, that the rural economy depends a lot on agriculture. We're a little constrained for time. Sure, please.
I think you made a very important point about technology. And I think this big challenge of financing that we have in this sector, we are all aware of, high transaction costs, right, when it comes to dealing with micro entrepreneurs or agriculture. And I think the next innovation, for that matter, is actually going to be how you use technology to kind of reach much cheaper credit to this sector. And I think there's a lot of work that can be done. And since we're talking about where innovation can happen, I think that is certainly in.
I can't resist adding on one more layer from the Indian, from a very Indian. Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth, requires reassurance. She moves. On Diwali, where does she go? Only where there's light, right? Light. So she needs a tremendous amount of reassurance. Technology, tagging money to work can help you do that.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah. We're a little constrained on time and don't want to keep people waiting. It just struck me that the best use of the few minutes that we have available might be to fast forward what we'd planned as the last section of this conversation. And with your permission and with the permission of the audience, I'd like to suggest that the section in the middle where we dive into some of the issues actually take place over a few drinks and snacks. The last section is actually an opportunity simply on account of where we are. We're in the middle of New Delhi. I think within a area of about 3 kilometers radius, you'd probably have all the decision makers that are looking forward in the next 8 years as Work for Progress hopes to create 1 million jobs, are looking to create a multi-million-dollar economy. It's all going to happen here, or from here, you could say. If we had to, the 5 of us, if we had to, if we had a wish, if there was a message that we'd like to put out to people here in the middle of New Delhi, what would that be? And we don't necessarily have to go in the same order, in any which way you please.
You don't want me to answer.
We'll get you to try, yeah. Our loudspeakers are pretty powerful, right? And I'm sure the people next door might be listening in. So,
maybe I can jump in. So, you know, sometimes people complicate it. For me, entrepreneurship is about the nexus between individual and opportunity. So whether you're thinking about how do you address the constraints that individuals have to accessing opportunity, or you're thinking about how do you finance the individual to access the opportunity, or, you know, it's always a nexus between individuals and opportunity. There is a lot of assumptions that conferences like this make outside young people. I will tell you something that shocked me in South Africa. So we brought young people for the first time in another similar conference, and they told us, we don't want to do farming. We don't want to do retail. We don't want to do it. That's not who we are. And it's interesting. How do we, what are the future, what is the future of industry that will be appealing to upcoming entrepreneurs? And how do we imagine facilitating those connections? How do we fetch the future of industry that we have not thought about in ways that bring young people and make it attractive for young people to scale and think about new innovations? If we're going to create new jobs, I don't think it's going to come from existing industries. It's going to come from alternative industries that maybe we have not thought of, because existing industries have large-scale barriers of corporate policy, capital, etc. New innovations are going to come from young people, but we need to think about alternative ways and alternative methods to empower them to think differently and fetch that future of industry we haven't thought about. And I think that's where the jobs are going to be. That's where new ways of consumptions, new ways of thinking about products are going to come and create more maybe 1 million jobs or 1 million livelihoods, however way you define a job.
Thank you. Who would like to go next?
My wish will be that the decision makers, but not only decision makers, that Indian society in general believe that systemic change is possible. At what the discourse that SDGs are offering us, people really believe that it's possible. And it can sound simple, but I think it's what we know about systemic change is when a particular community or society really in the profound level think it is too complicated to get there, then you can use a public discourse to say that you want to go there, but fundamentally you don't believe that is possible. And on the contrary, we see situations and communities that in very, very complex and difficult scenarios They believe that change, a particular type of change that is based on sustainability, and then they provide innovative solutions at a scale. I think we are taking for granted that most of the decision makers and society in general think that change is possible. And if we don't really understand those existing dynamics, if Indian society think that change is possible and what kind of change is possible and what type of change is desirable, I think it doesn't matter what we do in a systemic level. So really understanding those dynamics more profoundly and generating a narrative of transformation that really goes into the micro, but is connected to a more aspirational change, is going to be the key element for India and for any other society.
Okay. Thank you. Aloka?
It's a tough question, actually. But I'm thinking that, we have in our federal structure, it's going to be critical that the state and the center works together, because that's something we've seen in many cases where, particularly when you're working on solutions like this, you have issues there. So I think when we're reaching and when we're actually talking of creating entrepreneurs or creating livelihoods from a certain income level, it's important that the governments try and work together.
At several levels.
At several levels, yes.
And avoid the risk of over-centralizing.
Absolutely.
Things. Thank you. Rohtash, Nadia?
Lots of things to wish for. But let me build from her. Finally, I think we have a situation where the probabilities of center and states working together are the highest that I've experienced in my 45 years in industry, thanks to a particular constellation that's developing politically in our country. More than that, I think it'll need I would wish for extremely strong political will to dismantle the nexus between farm economics and politics, which is extremely strong, to be able to really do justice to an opportunity that is looking like $1 trillion opportunity from the $320 billion that we have today in the farm sector. And that means, actually, in one sentence, more or less, get out of the way. We built this massive, humongous structure of walls and laws and APMCs, and what you can't do is far, far, far bigger than what you really can do. So it needs political will, and that's what I'd wish for to see in the coming few years.
Thank you. Nadia?
I'll mention two things. I think one is skilling and really investing in non-traditional skills and helping equip young people with the type of skills that they need to innovate and access and be skilled for the jobs that are coming up now and the jobs of the future. And secondly, it's bringing the opportunities where people are and helping to connect their aspirations to entrepreneurship, to jobs in the localities where they are.